Well, I feel we have a wonderful group of people gathered here in the spirit of St. Francis and St. Clare of Assisi. And tonight is a holy time, as not only for the season of Lent, but that each of us are here. And so we thank God for the opportunity to gather and take a moment to continue our Lenten journey. I would like to begin by just saying welcome everyone. Um, Welcome to Franciscan Media's Lent with St. Clare. As you look around your screen, you see some of your co-workers and partners in building up God's kingdom here on earth. I am thrilled that you are here with us tonight. And to invite two of our, wonderful authors to share their experiences of Saint Clare of Assisi. But before I begin with introductions, I ask everyone to please go ahead and mute your microphones. If you have any questions, we're monitoring the chat space there. So go ahead and type your question or anything like that within the chat room, and I'll be happy to share that. And if there's time, we'll be able to ask and address some of those. After our Zoom, don't run away too quickly here, because there is a survey. And I know we all love surveys. It's one of our favorite things to do. So, but as an incentive, I will randomly select two people who complete the survey and send you signed copies of Susan's and Sister Margaret's latest work. Okay, so as a thank you for doing that. So if you feel lucky tonight, go ahead and complete that survey, and I'll be contacting you shortly if you're a winner. So there's only 9 questions, and it shouldn't take more than 9 minutes at the most. So please, and thank you in advance. Earlier today, I was speaking with Franciscan Media's president, Kelly McCracken. She asked if I was nervous, and I had to think about that. And after a moment, I replied, no. As I think about that answer now, maybe I should have said yes. But I replied no. And I responded that to me, this event feels like a gathering of family, of friends, of co-workers in the vineyard. Never meeting a stranger, in a Franciscan community. You're home. And so I'm so grateful and happy to be with you tonight. So thank you. Truly, you are our gift. And so thank you for being part of this. We have men and women across the world. I heard Anchorage, Alaska. I heard Illinois, a lot of Ohio, East Coast, West Coast, and up north and south. And so I'm just glad that you're all here. So thank you for, being a part of tonight. From Franciscan Media's team of friars and sisters, lay employees, and the millions of people who receive a word of hope in an email, a web search, a book, a magazine article, thank you for being a part of this ministry. We couldn't be the light that we are, touching millions and millions of people every month. 1 million people reach our website a month. Last year alone, we touched nearly 33 million people. It's because of you that we're able to do that. So thank you for being partners of that. So you've heard enough of me talking tonight, and I thank you for your patience. And so let's get to the stars of tonight also, our authors. Tonight, our format is I'm going to introduce Susan-Hines Brigger. A wonderful author. I'm sure you've read her one way or another from Franciscan Media, perhaps St. Anthony Messenger. For those who journeyed with Lent with St. Clare, the author of a booklet. She has just published a new work that's coming out this month and next month, and a lot of other titles that through the years that she's been a part of. So I'll introduce her, and after her time, I may ask some questions, and if we have time, if not, then Susan will go ahead and introduce Sister Margaret as well. That will then hopefully open up some opportunities for questions, and we'll go from there. So without further ado, let me ask and welcome Susan. Susan-Hines Brigger is the executive editor of St. Anthony Messenger magazine. but also wears many other hats for Franciscan Media. She oversees the daily Pause and Pray. It's a daily email, and you may subscribe and receive that. It helps with productions of our books and our book lines. She's also written a number of our Advent and other Lent booklets, including the most recent one here. Her connection with Saint Clare began when Susan visited Assisi and walked in the footsteps of the saint. As a mother of 3 girls and 1 son, she finds great inspiration in Clare's strength and fortitude in living out her beliefs and convictions, especially as a woman in times when that was not the norm. Susan and her husband, Mark, had been married for almost 28 years. Susan's most current work at Franciscan Media is, as I said before, the 2023 Daily Reflections Lent with St. Clare booklet, and soon to be released, or I think it just was released on our shop, Guided by Saints, a 30-day journal for inspiration and direction. Susan, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. As he alluded to a little bit in the introduction, I first kind of fell in love with Clare in Assisi. I went there on pilgrimage about 10 years ago. I knew very little about St. Clare, other than she was somehow attached to St. Francis. She kind of was a footnote to Francis in my mind. But then I went there, and the more I learned about her, I found myself becoming a bit of a cheerleader for her. It was always Francis, Francis, Francis. And I came to learn that Clare was a very formidable woman in her own right, and needed to be celebrated. So since then, I've spent a lot of time with Clare, both professionally and personally. I've come to recognize 3 things about Clare that really stick out to me and I find particularly powerful. The first is the power of words. As a writer, I was captivated by the letters that Clare wrote, so many of them. In the letters, her words were both powerful and insightful. She offered thoughts and lessons to those with whom she was corresponding, but I'm sure at the time she wasn't thinking that she was. My favorite letter that she wrote is her 4th one to Agnes of Prague. In that, she talks about mirrors, which is something as a noble she would have been very familiar with. And she tells Agnes to gaze into the mirror every day. But in doing so, she's encouraging her to look deeper than just her reflection, to look at who she is as a person and what she projects to the world and to outside. She also makes references to mirrors in her testament and in talking with her sisters about the same thing. What are you reflecting back onto the world around you? And by using such relatable items, she made her message really understandable and relatable for people. The second thing that sticks out with me is the power of Clare's conviction. I am one of 3 sisters. I have 3 daughters myself. I just love that about Clare. She knew what she wanted, and she was going to achieve it. And numerous times, she defied what would have been expected of her in order to follow her heart. The biggest event, though, was when she snuck out of her home on Palm Sunday and left behind all the comforts of the life she had known. It just must have taken so much strength to do that, especially as a woman. And then when her uncles tried to bring her back, she again refused and remained steadfast in her decision. She again showed that same determination when she fought to have her rule approved, up until the very moment of death. She was a very powerful woman, and I admire her greatly for that. But finally, I'm struck by her power of humility. there are a number of things that demonstrate that. But I think the most compelling are the tales of when she would wash and then kiss her sister's feet. And even I love the story of even when she startled one of her sisters when she did that, and the sister kicked her accidentally in the mouth. Claire just instinctively knelt right back down and kissed her sister's foot again. And when she was with her sisters, she resisted any sense of that she was in charge or that she was above them on any level. She saw herself in complete alignment with them, that they were all doing God's work together. There's so many more things I love about Claire. And a lot of them I discovered when I was writing this booklet. It gave me the honor of having Claire guide me through the season of Lent. But because of production schedules, though, Claire and I celebrated Lent like a couple months ago. So we're doing it all over again. This is our second go around. It was my honor to bring her words to everyone and all of you. She was, and she continues to be my muse. And I think even if I can be even a fraction of the force in the world that Claire was, I will consider myself so very blessed. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. It's been wonderful working along with you and seeing and listening to your experiences of Claire. We've had some informal conversations around the water cooler from time to time, and and it's great to see that we do have such a strong, powerful role model in the Franciscan, someone that Francis looked to, in times of questioning and uncertainty, and she was the rock. And so just wonderful. So one question. If you went back to Assisi, what would you do differently, or where would you go, or how would you, honor Saint Clare?
Would pay more to her role in the story. We focused a lot on Francis, and I think because that was my point of reference that I paid more attention to that than I did Claire. And if I went back again, I definitely would just be more aware.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I remember the first time I went, it was over Christmas and New Year. And I walked around the town for probably 2 days before I even went to the Basilica of Francis and Clare, just to get the spirituality of the place. To walk the very same streets that they did, to kind of smell, touch, hear, and then when I got a sense of that, then, I made that pilgrimage, that walk, to those holy places, and sat with them, and if anyone hasn't, and has the opportunity, I'd encourage that. It is a powerful experience. And Assisi is different than any other place, that you go around, and it's just, it's a holy place. And so thank you for sharing, Susan, and thank you for writing Lent with Saint Clare and opening up Saint Clare for so many people this Lent. It's inspiring to see, the primary sources, the letters, her words used, this wonderful then reflection that you brought together, and then a prayer, all in like a small 3x5 booklet. I don't know how you can pack so much into such a little space, but you did. And so thank you.
It was a pleasure to write it. It was an honor.
And I'm sure it was difficult too, trying to squeeze it all into a page.
It was, because I just wanted to write everything about it.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much. And I have a lot of chats here just saying how beautiful now everyone appreciates the work. So thank you, Susan. Let's go ahead and shift this over to Susan, if you'd welcome and introduce
Sure.
Margaret, please.
Like to welcome Sister Margaret Carney. Sister Margaret is a member of the Sisters of St. Francis of the Newman Communities. Her education in theology and Franciscan studies took place at Duquesne University, the Franciscan Institute of St. Bonaventure University, and the Pontifical University Antoninum in Rome. She served on the commission responsible for the revisions of the Rule of the Third Order Regular in 1982 and completed her research on the Rule of Saint Clare in 1988. From 1999 to 2004, she was the director of the Franciscan Institute and served as a founding member of the Commission on the Franciscan Intellectual Tradition. Her presidency of St. Bonaventure University began in 2004, and she retired from that post in 2016. But she continues to serve as a lecturer and leader for Catholic higher education and Franciscan organizations of the United States. Her most recent book is Light of Assisi, The Story of Saint Clare, an amazing book, by the way. Please join me in welcoming Sister Margaret Carney.
Thank you very much, Susan. I must say that when we look on the pandemic, most of us are thinking about the horrible things, but having all the cancellations that the pandemic created in my life, that's how that book came to be. So it wasn't all terrible.
Sister Margaret, as we prepared for our time, you had mentioned that there was Palm Sunday was a transformative event and a moment in the life of St. Clare. Can you tell us a little bit more about what was going on at the time and introduce this and what it really meant for St. Clare to say yes at that time?
Glad to do that, Chris. What I would like to do, and hello to everyone who's joined us this evening. Thank you. It's an honor to have you give this time, because what Susan did was offer us a way to go through the days of Lent. I thought it might be really helpful as we get very close to the end and to Passiontide, to Passion Sunday, Palm Sunday, to really focus on some actual events in her life, one of which is, of course, her departure from her home on the night of Palm Sunday, and then relate that to the way in which Clare, throughout her life, becomes a guide for how we understand Lent, but also how we understand this great mystery of the Passion of Jesus. So I'd like to start by just going back and pulling out from the legend of St. Clare a direct quote that I think it would, if you were reading slowly and trying to question all the vocabulary, it would have stopped you in your tracks, but maybe it didn't. This is a description of how she is preparing for Palm Sunday to follow the instructions of Francis, to go to the cathedral all dressed in her finery. And this is the word that is used. The Father Francis told her on that day of the feast, she should go dressed and adorned together with the crowd of people to receive a palm, and on the following night, leaving the camp, that's a quote, leaving the camp, she should turn her worldly joy into mourning the Lord's Passion. In other words, she and Francis are choosing a liturgical, scriptural framework for her departure from her noble status as a woman in Assisi. Because if you think about it, leaving the camp, She wasn't in a camp. She was in what the Italians would call a palazzo, a little palace up on the top levels of Assisi, where all of the nobles and the wealthy lived. But if you look to the side, and the print is so small you can barely read it, there is a reference to the letter to the Hebrews. So let me tell you what that passage in the letter to the Hebrews says, because I think it tells us that Celano, who wrote this biography of Clare, was very clear about this Lenten Passiontide connection. In chapter 13, letter to the Hebrews, therefore, for the this is the description is how the high priest sacrifices the animals in the tent of the Holy of Holies. And as you go through that description, this sentence occurs. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, Jesus also suffered outside the city gate in order to sanctify the people by his blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp and bear the abuse he endured. So when Clare completes this incredible rupture, this exodus from her house, she and Francis know what comes next. Jesus goes outside the camp to meet abuse and even suffering unto death. So there is a powerful text that they are living out of as she and he begin to inaugurate this very new moment in the story of Francis and his followers, the very new moment in which a woman who is bound to be followed by other women is going to come into the community and begin to open it up to the feminine experience and to feminine gifts. I also think that when we follow what happens immediately after this, of course, there's a beautiful image. She's received at the chapel of Our Lady of the Angels, the Porciuncula. The brothers are carrying torches. You've seen the paintings. They're gorgeous. They're like out of a fairy tale. She's in her finery. The brothers are all piously welcoming her. But the mood changes rather quickly, because when she's taken to a nearby Benedictine monastery, really for safekeeping, they haven't yet completed the plan for her to be at San Damiano, although that's coming. The very first abuse that she is going to suffer is, of course, from her family. And within a very short time, once they discover what has happened, they show up at this monastery breathing threats and violence and pleading and tears and storming at her. And we have to believe that had to be extremely difficult to sustain, not to break down, not to give in, not to be dissuaded. And I'm sure that some of their threats might have been extremely frightening to her. So her first experience of abuse is from her next of kin, as in the case of Jesus. Those who should have loved me turned away from me, it says in the psalm, and they have struck me. The one who should have been my friend, has now become my enemy. And so she's following through on that passion experience of Jesus, who's receiving hosannas on Sunday and the threat of crucifixion less than a week later. So when we read about or hear about the focus she has on the cross, on the passion, on suffering, it's the very foundational meditation, that she's not just sitting in a nice, quiet, solitary monastic, library or chapel. She's in the hurly-burly of these family intrusions. She also comes to the sisters offering to just help with the menial service of the monastery. Unheard of for a woman of her station. So she's also experiencing the letting go of the privilege of her station. And I suspect, and I have said this more than once, I suspect she's also experiencing the fear of those nuns in that monastery, that if they keep her too long, they may have more problems than they want with some of the powerful people of Assisi. And as I have often said in talking about this moment, I said, I have an image that the abbess at a certain point called Clare aside and said, "My dear, how long were you planning to stay with us?" Because I'm sure the nuns wanted a nice, calm Holy Week, and that was not what was happening at São Paulo. And what we're told, it's very interesting, the way in which her life tells this is she endured this for many days. Another citation says after a few days. So I'm not sure who was counting, but she does relocate to another small community, which is not cloistered, not seen as a monastic religious community. It's a group of women living a dedicated life of service and prayer. They live in a household out on the side of the mountain below the city of Assisi. And when she goes there, the experience of abuse and denial is repeated, because now her younger sister, Catherine, whom Francis will rename Agnes, comes to join her. And the family comes right back. And again, physically now, takes Catherine and tries to force her return. And there's a kind of miraculous intervention, and they give up the struggle, and Clare is able to rescue her and nurse her. And then shortly after that, they're able to enter San Damiano. So I think that this whole series of early episodes are Clare is living each day with a cloud over her head of threats of physical harm, of emotional harm, of her reputation being, assaulted in the streets of Assisi. Why would this young woman enter into this mad bargain with Francis and his brothers? I'd like to talk, though, also about what we learn as we go through all of the different versions of her life. What we learn from her letters, as Susan pointed out, how important and beautiful they are. And what we learn also from the sisters who were the witnesses who gave legal testimony for her canonization is the constant theme of a love of the cross. And here again, I think that we can look at some new ways of learning about that love. And one of the things that I have found very interesting is, thanks to the amazing work that has been done by some of our brother experts, in particular, Regis Armstrong, also Bill Short and Wayne Hellman, who worked on all those volumes of early sources. We now have some of the stories about Clare that we've not been able to read in English, for a very, very long time, or they weren't available to the ordinary reader. And one of those is A Life of Clare called, it's a tricky title, The Versified Legend of St. Clare. What does that mean? It means that instead of the prose that Thomas of Celano wrote her biography in. This is a biography, but it's told in poetry. And it might have even been intended that you could sing parts of it, because remember, most of the people were not literate. They didn't go to the library and check out Life of Clare. If they were going to learn it, somebody had to know it and somebody had to share it. So they could learn it through art, such as the docile, that wooden a tablet that is in the Basilica at Assisi with scenes from her life. So art was very, very important in telling the story. But this versified legend, I think, was an attempt to create a way to tell the story that might hold people's interest. And I find myself, I don't know enough about the idea of these other legends. There's one for Francis as well. But, you know, who knows? They may have been the rap artists of their day, you know, that they could come in and just start quoting these long poetic sections to tell her story. So there are 3 sections in the versified life of Clare. One is love of the cross. The second is how she memorialized the 3 days of the sacred Triduum. And the other is how, when she was trying to cure or help the sick, how she used the sign of the cross. So let me give you just a tiny sample of the way this versified legend underscores this theme about Clare. This is chapter 26. It's all small little chapters. The compassionate virgin cries over the suffering one. One is capitalized, it's Jesus. While she recalls salvation in the cross, praise and joy arise. This crying tempers, because the world's restoration flows from the cross, because a sweet tear cleanses bitter weeping, pain wipes away guilt. So this author is imagining that while Clare enters into a sense of the suffering of Jesus, as did Francis, she's also quick to celebrate the mystery of our redemption, of our salvation. And so it's not a morbid fascination with the suffering and death of Jesus, but it's the true embodied love of him and affection for him that makes her so extraordinarily sensitive to what he suffered. There's another section. She marks the time and hour of Christ's cross, and a greater sorrow takes hold of her mind. At the 6th and 9th hours, the nail of sorrow stands fixed. In other words, on Fridays and those hours, she is particularly attentive to remembering the passion of Jesus. And then there is an extraordinary event that is recounted here in this way. One year, when it was the time for the celebration of Holy Week, and the calendar had reached Holy Thursday, she began to enter into a profound spiritual, we almost say a trance. And she sensed this coming on. And she, according to the legend, she's even praying. She's not sure what this will be, and she's not sure she can bear it or accept it. But what we are told is that for the next 3 days, she became absolutely insensitive to anything around her. She did not eat, she did not sleep, she did not speak, she didn't respond to external stimuli. And it says this: a watchful servant frequently returns and sees her remaining motionless. Her features do not change. And then it goes on to show what the passage of days has been like. And then when the third day has come, Clare comes out of this trance and she says to the servant, "There's no need for a candle. Isn't it still day?" And the servant says, "No." She's lost all sense of time. Now, she is not the only saint or mystic to have that kind of experience. We know that Margaret of Cortona, for example, had a similar experience, and there are others who are stigmatists, but other saints who have had, shall we say, a kind of parallel experience of being almost taken out of themselves in memorializing those 3 days of the sacred Triduum. So this was certainly a fairly dramatic experience, and I'm sure that the whole monastery was, a bit on razor's edge as to what was really happening with her. And that servant was probably in charge while the others kept up their prayers and liturgies to make sure that she was all right and that nothing bad happened. But it goes on to say that once she understood what had happened, she forbade them to talk about it. And she forbade the servant to say anything at all. So she was startled to realize that people had observed this incredible experience of her following Jesus on his own passion journey. The last little section of this versified life is a catalog of miracles of her healing. And in this catalog, the constant theme is that when someone came to her for healing or help, she made the sign of the cross over that person. In fact, I think it is Chelano who says the sign of the cross was her chief medicine. And of course, many of these healings then were recorded and repeated over time. So Clare, living into the Passion with her very departure and her first days in the company of Francis and his brothers, living out Holy Week and the mysteries of the Passion and Easter. Clare, through a lifetime of being an example, a vessel of showing the experience of what it means to be so focused, so attuned to the mystery of Christ's suffering. There's a larger context here too, though, and that is that Clare enters into the life at San Damiano, as did the other sisters, and as did many laymen and women of the time, to lead what we call a penitential life. Now, we always have to be careful that when we talk about this penitential life, we don't automatically reduce it to, okay, they fasted. That must have been the penitential life. Or, they did not have comfortable clothing. In other words, we think of penance as doing something difficult or accepting something difficult. In this period of church history, the idea of a life of penance was a culture of spirituality that was very, very widespread. And there were many saints and persons seeking a life of perfection, of holiness, of union with Jesus, who would enter into what was called the order of penance or a life of penance. And yes, it involved the typical gestures that we all live in Lent: prayer, fasting, almsgiving, generosity to the poor. But it's more pervasive than that, because at the root, what is implied is that the person who embraces this penitential path is always listening for what God is directing, what God is calling one to do. One of the bishops of the time who knew about Clare, maybe even met her, but also knew holy women in the country we now call Belgium or Holland, where there was a movement of women who wanted to live this kind of life, wrote about one of these Belgian mystics who lived at the same time as Clare. And he described her in these words. And Marco Bartoli, who's somebody who's really studied Clare over a lifetime, says maybe these words could have been written about Clare. So let me just quote a little bit of this. This is the life of Mary of Wongy, a mystic woman from modern day Belgium. Embracing the cross of Christ, she was crucified in her flesh. She denied herself, placing herself under obedience to the will of another. She carried the cross, chastising her body with abstinence, and imitated Christ by humbling herself. She ate the blackest and coarsest bread, which even a dog would hardly be able to manage. And because of these and similar hardships, and he goes on to how her health eventually became damaged, which is also what happened to Clare. She fasted to an extent that she did some real harm to her own physical, her body and her stamina and her health, which shows up increasingly as she ages. So I also think that the love of Christ and the desire to accept suffering, as he suffered so horribly for us, is also one of the great themes or motifs for these people living a life of penance. And finally, I just discovered a really interesting essay by of an Italian expert on the Franciscans, who says he thinks that Clare's path to Gethsemane was not so much the big dramatic moments as it was the day-to-day inevitable suffering of dealing with the tensions and differences inside a community of women living in very close and dense proximity over many years. He's kind of saying, folks, let's get real. These sisters did not just live in sweet harmony with nary a crossword all those years. There had to be some real tensions, problems, and issues. And what he did is he went back and he looked at the way the sisters talked about Clare when they wanted to promote her canonization. And he found little clues in their descriptions that indicate how they remember not only the miracles she performed and the beautiful things she did, but kind of tucked in there in the original documents is little hints of how she had to take certain sisters in hand and sort of shake them by the shoulders and say, straighten up, girl. You're not living in the right way here. And all the sisters are, not happy about this. So she had to be a corrector, which would be inevitable, given her role. And he also goes on to make what I think is a really poignant and interesting point that has never occurred to me. And he says, isn't it interesting that we know about this miracle of Christmas where she is bedfast and the sisters all go to the Christmas Mass and she complains to God. She says, why are you leaving me here? And I can't celebrate Christmas. And then she has the vision where she sees the whole thing as if she were present. And then the sisters all come back and they're ready to tell her what a beautiful thing. She says, don't worry, I was there too. But he raises the question, why was she all alone? Wouldn't at least one person have stayed in case she needed something? And he cites another instance where she is bedfast. And we know that even though she was bedfast, she kept doing the needlework that the sisters did to make corporals and altar linens. She could barely do that, but the sisters could prop her up and she kept doing the work that contributed to the community. And at one point, she has dropped a piece and it's too far for her to reach. And it's like, normally you would think, well, she'll call out for a sister nearby and say, "Sister, I need some help." There's no sister nearby. Who helps her? The house cat. And I love this story because the cat figured out she was reaching for it. The cat picks up this piece of cloth, but the cat is dragging it on the ground and she scolds the cat. And the cat picks up its head so it doesn't drag on the ground. Now, that would be a YouTube video worth seeing, wouldn't it? You know, when you see all these crazy animal videos on YouTube. But in any event, at least it is established. And Francis has his wolf, Claire's got her kitty, you know, which is one of the ways that I think it's pleasant to remember her. But the point that this priest Felice Acroca is making is, here again, she seems to be alone. And he raises the question. She was sick for many years. Did her sisters become so used to her being sick and being patient and kind that they didn't worry at all times about making sure there was somebody nearby to meet her needs? That it was just, you know, this is the way it is and we're doing our best. And at first you would think, oh no, that could not have happened. But it happens in real life, doesn't it? You know, that we try to do our best for people who have long chronic illnesses, but sometimes individuals and even communities grow weary of that task. So I thought it was, I'm not sure that he's right, but I think he raises a really, really interesting question about what constituted the daily sufferings of Clare. And it isn't always some great mysterious or theological theme. It's daily life with other human beings, and the pain and the stress and the tension, and sometimes even the betrayal, you know, and the rupturing of relationships are true crucifixions. And she knew that, even though that would not have been something the sisters who survived her would be eager to talk about. So, you know, we can kind of think about that and imagine maybe there's more to the story. So Susan, you and I still have work to do to find out and to go back into this. So I hope this has been helpful, but I think we can look to Clare as we've been looking to her all Lent. But as we move now very close to the sacred Triduum, she lived that Triduum from her first days in the Franciscan sisterhood, brotherhood, to the very end of her life. And let's pray to her to get us into that same devoted spirit.
Wow. I don't know where to begin, but I'll start by saying thank you, Sister Margaret. You've done an amazing job of picking up where Susan, you know, stopped tonight and continued us through this Paschal mystery, this Easter to the cross. And so thank you very much. Amazing. As someone who has cats and can relate to Claire's story, I think that's wonderful that the cats were part of that. And I've both of mine have definitely been challenges, and so I'll see if I can make sure they honor that. So, in your presentation tonight, Claire was a woman of her time, but beyond her time. She lived at that moment, but then connected with the history, the life of Jesus, following the footsteps and trying to mirror and mimic as best as they could the life and steps of Jesus. And I think that's something we all try to do. And especially during Lent, this great season, is an opportunity to take a moment to focus and whether it's praying, fasting, giving alms, is introduce something new into our life that will bring us closer and help us on that path and journey to cross into the Easter celebration beyond that. It seemed in sometimes Claire's life, it was easier. And tonight you also showed how it was rather difficult. Throughout these stories, throughout her life, I guess I didn't understand and fully appreciate, that the daily ordinary day, of our life can be such a tool and resource of holiness. And you look at Francis and Clare, and sometimes, these are great saints, the models par excellence, but it's the daily crosses that we carry, our interactions with our family, our friends, our small communities that can be the most painful, and bring us closest to that what we're called to. So thank you for that. It's helped me through my journey, and it's given me something to reflect upon also about how I am in my community and what I am challenged with and how I'm challenging another, perhaps even. So thank you for sharing. Thank you. I guess, again, wish to thank Susan for her time and for sharing. Thank you for everyone for joining us as well. You've made this a wonderful, wonderful time. Before we close, we have just a few minutes here. I do wish to remind everyone who just joined us or joined us along the way that there will be a Zoom survey that pops up on your screen after our time ends. If you'd please go ahead and complete it. It takes just 5 or 10 minutes. And for an incentive, we have some free books to give away. I have a signed copy, Sister Margaret's book, Light of Assisi, The Story of Saint Clare, and Susan's brand new book that's coming out, Guided by the Saints, a 30-day journal for inspiration and direction. And so I'll be happy to put these in the mail. So please go ahead and complete that survey and submit that, and good luck. If you are still searching for more resources, I invite you to check out franciscanmedia.org. Where we have a pillar page and a lot of information on St. Clare. If you're looking for books, there's some additional books of St. Clare as well at our shop. So please visit shop.franciscanmedia.org for those. All this could not be possible without your help and support. And I realize, there we are. I'll move this back to that. You are our partners in ministry, and I wish just to say thank you for everything you bring to Franciscan Media and for sharing God's love with so many millions of people. The work that we're about, building God's kingdom and sharing God's love, could not happen without you. And so thank you. You're an important partner and an important member of our community. With that said, we pray for you every day at morning prayer with the Franciscan Media team. Please pray for us. The survey that comes out asks for some suggestions and some ideas. And so if there's something that you think that Franciscan Media should publish, go ahead and add that in there, because we're always looking for ideas and suggestions and ways to share the Franciscan charism and sharing God's love.
Chris,
please.
Did you ask if there's room for questions? I don't know if I heard that or not.
I did. I put that in the chat message, but I have, looks like about 3 minutes. If you wish to ask a question there, go right ahead. Who's speaking here?
Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, welcome. What's your question?
My question, 2 of them, and maybe you can't field both of them, but I never heard of this letter to, I can't pronounce the name, ERM of Burgess. And also, is the monastery that St. Agnes started in Prague still operating, or how long did it operate? And it seemed like it was far different than San Damiano.
Right. And the monastery of Prague did not remain a monastery. However, it did get preserved over the years. And actually, the communist government in Czechoslovakia turned it into an art museum. So we need to thank the communist government, because it could have been destroyed. So it can be visited today, but it's not as a religious place. And Ermentrude was a woman who was probably like this other holy woman, Mary of Wagny, a holy woman living in what today we would call Belgium. And I love that letter to Ermentrude, but there's not sufficient proof that Clare wrote it, but they keep including it in her writings. So I'm like, one of these days we're going to find out, but it's a beautiful text. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions that just came through. Heather is asking, do you offer pilgrimages to Assisi? And I know you have a long history of working with the Franciscan Pilgrimage Program, Margaret. So
yeah, I do work with the Franciscan Pilgrimage Program, which is headquartered in Wisconsin. So if you were to go to their website, now I only do this maybe once a year. But if and listening to what Susan said, I think one of the things we may want to start thinking about is pilgrimages that are centered on Clare and the women as much as they are on Francis and the brothers. So I'm going to take that suggestion back, but I do some pilgrimage work.
wonderful. Thank you. And there's a wonderful question here, probably that we can just all reflect upon and think about is, as we all work remotely, how do we maintain a spirit of community? I mean, I think, Margaret, you shared a little bit of how Clare and her community shared community, not always together. I think we all have to be very intentional. So thank you, Kelly, for adding to that as well.
Right.
That technology has given us the opportunity to spread farther and farther and farther apart. But what we hope and long in our deepest is a realization of intimacy and belonging and acceptance. And we find that together, or 2 or 3 are gathered, or 50 or 60 gathered online. And that's why I said at the beginning, it's like a family. And I wasn't as nervous as I had been with Father Murray Bodo, perhaps at our first session. And so thank you for making me feel comfortable and for being part of their community and being so kind. So thank you. I think we have just run out of time, and I want to say again, thank you very much, Margaret and Susan, for your time and for sharing. Thank you again to our donors, everyone who's in attendance and being part of our Franciscan Media family. Please stay tuned. We will record, well, once this recording is finished, we'll upload it to YouTube so you can share it with everyone else. And keep a look at your email, because we hope to have another evening or an opportunity to gather like this in a month or 2 months. So please look out for that email and see who's coming. So God bless you.
And thank you, Susan.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Blessed Lent,
Margaret.
everyone. And as we enter into this holy season of the Triduum and Passion and Easter, may God go with you and bless you on your journey. Thank you all.